Hi, I'm Peter, and welcome to the podcast, Waking from the Fire. I have a great guest with me today, Jill Mackey. I'm going to read you her credentials because they're so impressive, and I can't remember them, to be honest. Jill's a licensed professional counselor, a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor, a national certified counselor, and a certified clinical trauma professional. She is qualified to help just about anyone, and I do. When I say that, I'm sincere about it. I happen to have known Jill for now 4 years, I think it's around, right, Jill?
Mm-hmm.
And I love people like Jill because she's got a tremendous amount of knowledge. You're going to see that in a second. But I also love her because I know her on a personal level, and she practices what she preaches. And I admire that. That's integrity, that's authenticity. And I want to surround myself with more people like that. So Jill, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Pete. Thank you for the warm welcome. Good to be here.
You're welcome. Yeah, and I always love talking to you because I after 4 years of my personal journey, therapy, 12-step work, writing a memoir, I always learn something about something from our conversations. And I hope you're going to feel like that too. I want to tell you something real funny that happened real quick. Jill and I had a time frame where we were going to start this, and she texted me something about your dog walker being late, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I texted back because I'm so clever and witty. I texted back, "Don't stress about our stress segment." And what it did was it made me smile a little, and it reminded me something, Jill, that you taught me as well. Don't take yourself too seriously. And now that's not a put down, right?
Right. No.
That's just like, if I'm too serious, then I'm missing life. I'm not having fun. I'm not enjoying. I'm not present for this conversation. We'll talk about all that stuff. So Jill, we have this few minutes together. I want to get the most impact for the viewer. I want them to walk away with something. So I want to share something personal. It's not so personal. I did a podcast about it, so I guess it's not that personal anymore. But recently I was away for this wonderful weekend with a wonderful person in a place that I have envisioned being for 10 years. I manifested this past weekend. I'm walking down the street. I'm doing the things that I had dreamed and envisioned, and I should be happy, right? But there are moments, Jill, where something feels off, something's wrong. For me, it's like I did something wrong, or I shouldn't be having so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, absolutely. So some of that, not to interrupt, I'm sure you have more that you'd like to share about that, but there's an inherent restlessness that I think a lot of us experience. Pervasive dissatisfaction is another way that I sort of describe that, where it just creeps in, right? Everything's going the quote way that you want it to. We had sort of a fantasy of the way it was supposed to be, like you said, should be happy, right? So we're already doing what I call shoulding on ourselves, right? Where we have expectations of how it's supposed to be, and expectations are premeditated resentments, like it's never going to live up to what we want it to be. And because of this instant gratification that we live in now, it's always what's next. It's what's after this, right? So we're on this trip, we're having a good time, and we're thinking about the meal that we're going to eat later, right? And then we get to the meal, and when we're in the meal, we're not thinking about the meal, we're thinking about the beach the next day. And then we're at the beach and we're like, man, I can't wait for this concert that's going to happen later. And on we go as we sleepwalk through our lives and the things we've been looking forward to for weeks or months, as opposed to being in the present.
Why do we do that, Jill?
Well, the present is really challenging. I don't know if you've ever tried to meditate and just sit with yourself, right? But most people will try to meditate and sit with themselves and say like, oh, it didn't work. I didn't feel better. The point of meditating is not to feel better. It's to be able to sit with yourself, right? And because we struggle with sitting with ourselves because of many things that we've spoken about, the phone, Netflix, distractions, there's so many things that are fragmenting us all the time. So our attention span is very short. And it's very challenging to really sit with and be with ourselves, especially if we have trauma. The present moment just doesn't feel accessible sometimes, even when we're in the best situations.
I get that loud and clear. I want to back up for a second because on one of our segments, you said something that helped me see stress and anxiety in a different point of view. You mentioned that there's a difference between stress and anxiety, right?
Yes.
What's that difference?
So stress is very situational. Anxiety is something that we kind of live with on a daily basis. That's not situational, right? So I'll give you an example. We've talked on the podcast before about anxiety and PTSD and personally struggling with these sort of things. And so I go into my jujitsu class the other day, and my instructor says, "Do you guys ever get anxiety when?" And I go, "Yes."
Fill in the blanks.
Yeah. And he's like, "I didn't finish what I was going to say." I'm like, "You didn't need to." He's like, "Well, I was going to say, do you get anxiety when you go to the doctor?" I said, "Yeah, well, most people get stress when they go to the doctor. Anxiety is generalizable. We can have specific phobias and what have you. But when we go through anxiety, right?" So he said, I was talking about going to the doctor. I said, "You don't get anxiety when you have anxiety, right? Anxiety is a state that we're in regardless. We don't get anxious about a job interview. We're stressed. We can identify the stimuli that's upsetting us. Whereas anxiety, it's all this old sort of cropped up stuff that can come from loneliness, insecurity, lack of focus in situations, feeling disenfranchised about how our life is going, on. But it's more of an internal sort of experience versus external factors impacting it.
Great. So would you say stress is external stuff?
Yes. And stress on a pervasive level for a prolonged period of time can lead to anxiety, right? But a lot of people, they use these terms really sort of pejoratively, like, "Oh, I have anxiety." When in reality, there are stressors that they can contain and control, food wise, relationship wise, workout wise, et cetera, that would reduce the stress and assess whether or not it is anxiety.
And so stress is external. It's something that happens to us, a test we have to take,
Yep.
a project we have to finish, a conversation we have to have.
Mhm.
What's anxiety then? And
So,
where's
So anxiety can come from genetics. It can come from learned behavior. If we live in an anxious home, in an anxious system where there's a lot of neuroses, anybody in our family like obsessive compulsion, stuff like that, that can kind of bleed down to us. And it can come from a variety of different things,
and
honestly.
I remember you saying in one of our segments that it was more internal versus stress as external, anxiety is internal,
Yes,
right?
it's very
It's in,
inherent. And it's generally anxiety can be our response to stress, right? We
Mhm.
don't know what's happening to us. We feel panicky. Whereas generally when we're stressed, it's my job is stressful. My relationship is stressing me out. My dog's barking when I'm trying to do something important versus anxiety. It's sort of like a whirlwind, right? Lots of physical symptoms and really not feeling safe kind of in our bodies and clueless as to what's happening.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly how I felt when I was on this recent trip. I was walking down the street, you
Mhm.
know, everything was great, but something was wrong. I was
Right,
worried. I know for me, it comes from my childhood.
right.
So, what's the relationship between childhood trauma? And maybe we can talk about this because there's so much to talk about that. And the trauma doesn't have to be an obvious beating or a verbal lashing, right? It could be subtle.
Mhm.
And well, why don't you talk about that? Maybe what's the difference of?
So
Yeah.
another piece I wanted to add about the stressor as well is that stress ends when stress ends, right? Like it's so easy, like, oh, stress is over. Hence,
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress disorder, right? In the DSM-4, that was under anxiety disorders. Now it's its own trauma-related disorders, but it was under anxiety disorders because you get anxiety because the stressor's over and you're still preoccupied, disoriented, obsessing. Years later, it crops up for you, right? So childhood trauma, like you're saying, when we're in a horrific environment going through covert or overt stressors, where an overt stressor is something very obvious, right? Where it's molestation, it's abuse, hitting physically, emotionally, psychologically, where covert is passive aggression, guilt, it's more of like a gas leak, right? You don't
Mhm.
realize it, and then all of a sudden you're dead, right? It's like the water you swim in. It's just what's happening. It's just the way the family interacts, critiques, sarcasm, jokes, right? That can easily be labeled euphemistically, like, oh, we're just having fun, right? Which later in life, as we've dissociated through our life, through all of these present moments, it's like the anguish comes for us. Even if we have to-do lists and we're busy, we can't possibly be busy enough to outrun the trauma and the anxiety, right? So you're in a nice moment and your inner children are like, ooh, this is a perfect time because now we're calm and we trust Pete and we trust Jill and we're at peace now. So now here comes all the feelings that we process, that we didn't process, that we shoved down.
Yeah, so that's so interesting, because now we have this other layer. We've got stress, we've got anxiety, now we've got inner children that are
Yes.
um
Hmm.
what, like throwing temper tantrums inside of us. I've heard it referred to something like that.
Yeah, temper tantrums. We don't want to be so pathological. They're good kids. They deserve some hugs and some kisses. But they're really just reacting. Like it wasn't safe to react. If you had a reaction, I mean, I don't know about you, but in my family of origin, a lot of times you couldn't even show facial expression. Right? God forbid you give a side eye to anybody. It was bad news bears. So we
Yeah.
weren't allowed to feel that back then, whether the parents said it or didn't, right? It was a don't talk rule, don't trust, don't feel, right? It didn't feel safe, right? We developed these personalities, so we didn't express that. And so as we get later in life and we go through maybe midlife crisis, or we go through stressful events at work or whatever, the anxiety starts to erode our self-confidence. So another perfect example between stress and anxiety, imposter syndrome falls under anxiety, where no matter how successful you are, no matter what happens in your life, it does not convince you that you are worthy, right? So it goes back to the core beliefs, whereas somebody who is stressed would not experience those eroding core beliefs that, like, I am not worthy of breathing this air because I made a mistake.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing up imposter syndrome. That's what comes up for me when I'm in these situations, when I'm on stage in front of an audience doing what I absolutely love, and then I have this moment of panic. I'm walking down the street and do with someone that I care about and doing things that I really love, and then I have this moment of panic. And I know for me, because I've done this work and I've been, especially because of the memoir, Jill, and I've shared this with you, I can see the exact moments when my self-doubt came up. So when I published this podcast, I also published an excerpt of the memoir that helped me identify walking down the street and why I felt everything else seems to be fine. And all of a sudden I'm panicked, there's something wrong. I'm in trouble. Someone's going to be angry with me. And I was able to see exactly, because of the writing, where it came from. And it came from my father. And I've been able to forgive him through the work, which was something I never knew I had to do. I've heard that before, you need to forgive to move on.
Right.
So some incredible things happened as a result of that work. But maybe share with our audience. So like my daughter says this, if something good happens, she expects something bad to happen. And I know part of it is I put that on her because of my childhood. It was put on me, and that really hurts me to think that, but at least I'm able to have this conversation with her, and Jill, at least she's able to express that to me. I would never have been able to express that to my mother or to my father.
Insight, right? She's aware that this is happening, which I wanted to pause on that for a second. When we're in the street and we're walking and we're having fun and we're having that coffee, and it's something we've been looking forward to for weeks, and we're there and we're like, is this thing on? Like, why? What's wrong with me? And then the shame creeps in, like, why can't I just have fun like this again? Like, can't I just be present and drop in? So there's so much judgment and so much shame. So then we're going further in the hole, and maybe we're with somebody. We're like, oh, I don't want to tell them. Then they're going to be upset that I'm not having fun.
Wow.
So in terms of just chiming in on like a skill that somebody might be able to do there for you in that moment, right? Soothing ourselves, like, I'm afraid, but I'm not in danger. I'm okay. If you don't want to have fun, self, that's okay. No pressure. You don't have to have fun.
That's incredible, Jill, what you just said. There's so much going on in there. That is most of that stuff subconscious or unconscious?
Yeah, totally. So something's getting activated in that moment. Whereas if you look back on a childhood and you think about the fun moments, that's why we have close hostile relationships with people, because when something good happened, something bad happened. It's like, best Christmas ever. And then like mom was wasted and like burned the entire brisket, right? There was never solely positive moments. It was positive weaved with some chaos and some negativity, and we euphorically recall it, or we laughed about it because that's what we do. We label something, oh, you remember the time when dad, and you look back, you're like, that was extremely traumatic. I don't know why I thought that was funny. Right? Or we just
That's how we got through it. Right?
Yeah, you laugh so you don't cry. Exactly.
So it sounds like you're talking about triggers, right?
Right,
Something.
exactly. So like your daughter, the magical thinking, right? thinking that something bad is going to happen because something good happened. So what I was going to say there is that we didn't have solely positive experiences, right? So when you go through experiences later in life that are positive, it's important to affirm your inner self, your inner kids, what have you, or even your anxiety, like, this is nice. This is fun. Something terrible might happen. That's true. And that doesn't take away from right now. Because what we do is we rehearse tragedy and we forebode joy, and thus do not let ourselves have any positive moments. So we ruin all the moments because we're worried something will happen, which leaves us no endurance to tolerate anything that happens in life, which is why we feel so burned out and broken down all the time.
Yeah. And that you just described exactly where I was 4 years ago. That led me, I hit a bottom, as it's known, that led me to look deeper. Look, I've been a motivational speaker for many years. I have degrees in outward success, imposter syndrome, but there was always something wrong. And I hit that bottom and I had to search for something deeper than, like, I love Tony Robbins. I love his stuff. I've been to 4 of his seminars for weeks at a time. I love Eckhart Tolle. But for me, I had to go deeper. And Jill, I don't know if you experience this with your clients. If it's not, self-help is not enough. There's, we need to dig deeper, because if we didn't, all the stuff would work, right? Like, you go to the gym, you should feel better. You eat healthy, you should feel better. But still, we can do those things and still there's something wrong. Maybe talk about that. You know, I see so many people, Jill, they go to yoga, they try to meditate, like you said, and they still don't feel right. Is that just that stuff that you said we compound or we suppress, that we keep down because we're always trying to be, hey, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm stoic, maybe suppress those emotions, and then they just overtake us sometimes?
So I love that you said that. And I actually told one of my clients today, I was like, hey, I'm going to be on a podcast today. I'm going to use what you just said in my podcast. And he was like, oh, what did I say? Right. So he's like, I know that I should work out and I know it's going to help me. And I know what to do. I just don't really have the motivation to do it. And say I start to do it and then I don't feel so motivated anymore. And then I quit on myself. Then I'm feeling shame and self-doubt. Right. So it's like, what gets in the way? And I said to him, we'll call him Bob. I'm like, Bob, it's not that you don't know what to do. It's often that we're not willing to do it on a prolonged period of time. Right? Like, this is going to be hard. I'm going to have to like look at myself and feel some feelings. And I don't necessarily know that I want to do that. Right. So we can do all the right things, but it's the right thing for the right reason. Right. I'm going to go to yoga and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to go to therapy because I want to feel better. It's not about feeling better, Pete. It's about getting better. Right? It's about doing things we don't want to do, right? It's not just making those changes on the outside. It's about doing the internal work, the digging deep, right? We can go to Tony Robbins and we can say all the affirmations we want until we're blue in the face, right? But recovery is about feeling and not feeling. It's not about feeling good and feeling bad. Feeling bad is just as much part of the feeling spectrum. And we see psychological health only when we can accept all spectrum of feelings, that feeling bad is just as valued as feeling good.
Yeah, that's so, and I wish I had a notebook like you have to write some of this stuff down, but because you just, in every exchange, there's so much that I want to talk to you about, but we have a limited time. But we're going to do so many more of these podcasts because they're so valuable. But to talk about your friend, not getting better, but being present with those emotions, just identifying those emotions. How do we do that? So I'm walking down the street, something's wrong. And in the past, what I would have done is go for a drink, go get some food, go act out in various ways. For some of us, it's alcohol, drugs, porn, binge watching TV. We talked about Netflix saying that binge watching is actually part of their marketing campaign, which just is so disturbing. And you know me, I hate to judge, but I tell my children, binging is not a good thing. You don't want to be binge worthy.
Right, exactly. So to your point, 100%, I completely agree. I think it's important, and I'm reading a book by Pema Chodron right now, which she's just amazing. You know, Brene Brown's like my surrogate mom. You know, all of them, I'll just like take them home with me. And
why not?
Be my tribe.
Who says she can't be, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So it's called The Places That Scare You. which is a fantastic reference for people. And it talks all about wanting so much external security. Like we want resolution, we want peace, we want certainty, we want stability, and we suffer because we expect guarantee. We expect things to be consistent all the time. And that's not reliable, right? So she says, and I say, and I think it's valuable for everybody to hear, to be inquisitive, to be adaptable, to be able to roll with the punches, right? And I say that having been somebody who, the fact that it was snowing today, I'm like, this is going to ruin my whole day, throw off my whole schedule. I want to know exactly the second it's going to stop snowing. When are they going to plow, right? And I say to myself, you don't get to know that. You don't get to know that, right? So like you said, she says in here that we often create methods of escape, right? Which strengthens the dysfunctional patterns and habits that we have, right? So she says, when I feel anxious or bored, do I go to shopping as a way of coping, right? Do I turn to alcohol? Do I turn to food or sex or drugs to cheer myself up? And we get no long-lasting satisfaction out of these things because these things are what we call shadow comforts. They don't actually comfort us. That's the problem. It's the easy button. The shadow comfort is that it casts a wide shadow over our life. And afterwards, after we do it, so back to the skills-based thinking, before we engage in a behavior, we ask ourselves, is this going to leave me feeling more empty and searching or more wholehearted and fulfilled? Right? Am I going to feel worse after this? If I eat this one cannoli, then I'm going to want to eat pizza, on and on and on.
I love that. Absolutely. Can we back up? Is there a step before that? Because I think some of us don't even identify that there's something wrong. Right? Walking down the street and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you ate 4 slices of pizza right before dinner. You had no intentions. You had 5 drinks. All of a sudden, I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
How help our audience to identify when they might be getting into these situations? They might be triggered, if you want to say that.
Sure. So for me, when I get triggered, it's the redness on the ears, it's the tunnel vision, it's the rehearsing the negative thing that I want to say to that person ad infinitum amount of times in my head. It's feeling flushed, feeling very warm, like I said, panicking, feeling young, right? So I think, and we've talked about this before with the wellness planning, we know for the most part the times when we are not at our best and our behavior just goes out the window. We're not living in alignment at all. And so looking back on our days and our lives and seeing what are the red light indicators, right? How have I don't want to say misbehaved, we don't want to pathologize it. How have I not acted in a way that's true for me, that is out of alignment with my true self? And if you know it's going out with your coworkers, or if it's hanging out with your significant other or hanging out with family, prepare for that. Create a wellness plan around that. Ideally, it's proactive as opposed to reactive, right? But for the most part, we get in the jam and we're stuck. And then what do we do? In that moment, it's mindfulness, examining at any point in time. We can restart the interaction. We can leave. We can go to the bathroom, troubleshoot. Like, okay, what's the self-talk that I need to do right now? Like we've talked about having the green tea when you go to a new city. Like, what do I need to do to restart this? There's no efforts. It's not, oh, okay, well, baby's out with the bathwater. I ate 2 pieces of pizza. Okay, what did that do for me?
2,
How can I recover
4.
Yeah, 4.
Just 2?
Maybe it's a calzone. It was all on top. Right? It's only counted as 2 calorically. Right. So yes, and also recognizing when do we feel like our back's against the wall? That's when most people act out. Most people, well, there are people who pleasure seek as well, but most people it's pain avoiding. Right? Yeah. I feel insecure. I felt fat in that outfit, or that person looks hotter and nicer and more brilliant than me, or created, say for this podcast, if I came in and I was like, I have to be brilliant, I have to only say the right things and have all the answers, right? Then all of a sudden you're knee deep in like Tostitos and, crumbs all over. You're like, how did that happen? Right? So knowing our process and knowing ourselves and saying, oh, I'm putting these expectations on myself, self-imposed rush, what have you.
Okay, so you're walking down the street and all of a sudden something's not right. Maybe it's your gut, maybe it's your ears, maybe it's like they say, we don't follow our gut anymore, and our gut is another brain, and it's a way to say, okay, something's not right. Here I am in this great environment, something is wrong, but nothing's really wrong. It's just the anxiety that's within me. I'm getting triggered for some reason, maybe because something good is happening. I always expected something bad, the black and white thinking. So getting present, give me some of those strategies you've given me before to get present like that. You talked about standing up and leaving the room. What about breathing or You talked about touching.
Sure, sure. So my first go-to is to be still, like be completely still and say, what do you need? When I do one of these, I'm like, what's happening right now? What do you see that I don't see? Right? So over your hand, over your chest, taking some breaths, right? We can do the box breathing, right? We can do the colored breathing where you're breathing in yellow, breathing out blue, breathing in red, breathing out orange, right? Sometimes I'll put an insight timer, Sarah Blunden podcast on, or meditation for 10 minutes and just listen to it. But asking myself, what do I need? If I'm rushing around and I'm trying to soak in everything, I'm going to ruin the moment if I'm not so pleased. Just taking a seat somewhere, right? And getting the essential oils kind of out of my bag, putting some lavender on my hands, grounding, right? Doing the leg tracing. I mean, I don't want to overwhelm anybody with too many skills because sometimes that can be overwhelming too. We get decision fatigue. I have
Which
80
one do I
skills.
do?
Now, what am I supposed to do? My go-tos when I'm anxious, immediately lavender essential oil, immediately getting something warm or cold that I can drink for sure. I have my ring usually that I wear. I can light some candles and just asking my inner kids, what do you need? What do you see that I don't see? What's going to make you feel most comfortable in this moment right here and now?
Yeah, I
And
love
staying
that.
still long enough to get the answer.
I love
And
that,
doing
Jill.
whatever it is too.
Yeah. Now you're so advanced. I don't know if you know this, but you're so advanced because you've been practicing this for so. That's why it's one of the reasons why I love what you do and what you share, because you practice it. If you're sitting out there, my audience, and you're like, oh my God, I don't even know what emotion. I can't even say, am I happy? Am I sad? Am I scared? Am I angry? Am I jealous? Am I judgmental? It's okay. It's just, right, Jill? It's just acknowledging something's not right, but I'm safe. I'm okay. And then it's a process of identifying, and you'll someday, I promise you, you'll be like Jill. It'll come, but it takes tremendous amount of work, and it takes not binging. It takes identifying those behaviors. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed watching this and saying, man, this is just all over my head. I wanted to do this segment, Jill, I wanted to do this segment and throw some of this stuff out because I want to show people what's possible, because the things that they're doing now may not be working for them. And if they're not working, it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because you're just missing something. Like me, I was missing something. I'm a health speaker. I have advanced degrees. I read psychology. I love this stuff. And still, I couldn't figure it out. And what it was for me, Jill, I couldn't figure it out on my own. I needed a great therapist, and I got one in Frank. I needed a great program. For me, it was appropriate to have a 12-step program. And the journaling for me became a memoir that, now I'm not saying you have to write a memoir to heal, but for me, it put me back into the room with my mother and my father, my mother too, not just my father. I love them both. When they, at the exact moments, they embedded onto me their worst qualities. And then I did the same to my children. So we have so much more to talk about. I want to be respectful of your time. So
can I just reflect on what you just said before we wrap up? Is that okay?
Of course.
So the feelings identification, key, but that might not happen because it's so many feelings kind of yelling at us at the same time. And that's okay. Once we recognize what the feeling is, then we will be able to do something with that. But the biggest, most important first part of all of this is non-judgmental stance and acceptance. If you are in an internal storm, you do not have to change that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's the pathologizing that we do. There's something wrong. You're supposed to be in a better mood, cheer up, get over it, right? We don't have to do that, right? So in what you said too, empowering everybody, we all start somewhere, giving up some of the old skills before we find the new skills. We end up in a little bit of a bypass. So if we got to hang on to some of the old skills before we get some of the new skills, that's totally normal. We're not the only one. And also too, we're not going to figure it all out. That's the solving. That's where we get in here, the intellectualizing. We're not going to figure it all out. We got to feel it out. We don't figure it out, right? We can't solve a problem of the mind with the mind that created it.
Yeah, I love that quote.
Right,
That's
right.
from
So very important. We act our way into a right way of thinking instead of think our way into a right way of acting, right? So giving ourselves permission to be free and have fun and be joyous and not be on the clock emotionally all the time, right? So just wanted
right.
to say
Thank
those
you.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. I just want to share this with the audience.
Mhm.
For me, I know when I'm in that panic mode, anxiety triggering, I feel it now. It happens in my gut and in my chest. Something, I tighten up, my shoulders get all tight, and I'm like ready for action. Like someone's going to beat me up. I'm like in fight or flight response, right? I'm either going to run like hell or I'm going to
Yeah.
stay and fight. And now I know the first thing I do is talk to that little inner child and
Yes.
say, what's going on? You okay? Your
Right.
father's not going to hurt you. You're not alone. You're not stuck in that basement. You're not stuck in that van. He's
Mhm.
not chasing your mom around with a knife. You're
Mhm.
okay. You're safe. Let's
Right.
talk about this. And that gives me a moment to
Right.
calm down, to get present, to look at the person I'm with and what I'm doing, being on this podcast with you, and just say, I'm going to be okay. And I don't have to look like I'm fine either. I don't
No,
have to be
you don't.
perfect. I could
Right.
tell the person, right? Eventually you'll surround yourself with people that you'll be able to say things like I say to Jill, I send her a text sometimes, Jill, I'm struggling today. I'm
Mhm.
hopeless. I don't see a future. Thanks for
Mhm.
listening. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's all I need to do to connect to another human being so I'm not isolated. All these things. My God, Jill, there's so much for us to talk
Right.
about.
The only thing worse than feeling crappy is feeling like we have to pretend like we're feeling okay when we're feeling like that, right?
Yeah.
So another sort of funny thing that I say to myself when I get myself wrapped in these self-imposed emergencies where everything, like the dog walker running late is like World War III, like I'm obsessed and what am I going to do, right? It's like, slow down. Who asked me to do all these extra things that I added to my own plate, number one? And like this self-imposed schedule is impossible to adhere to. Who created this? Right?
Yeah.
Me, I did. If I created it, I can take some stuff off the list. Not everything's an emergency, right?
Yeah.
And that's what anxiety, different than
You're,
stress, tells us that
you're
everything's an
so right.
emergency.
You're so right. I shared this with you before. I was taking my son to a Yankee game. I had about 30 minutes and I was going to go buy sneakers that would have taken me 45 minutes. Like I needed new sneakers right before the Yankee game. And I had it in my mind. I can do it. I can rush if I speed, if I do this, if I do. And all of a sudden I said, I'm going to go with these sneakers. No
Yeah.
one's going to judge me. And if they do, that's cool.
Yeah. Right.
So what? And
Absolutely.
doing that,
Yes.
I don't know how to describe it. It seems so simple. I love this stuff because it seems
Yeah.
too simple. It can't possibly make you feel better. But when I said, Peter, you do not need new sneakers right now for the Yankee game, I was able to breathe and say, yeah, I don't need new sneakers. I'll be okay. I'm going to get there on time with my son. We don't have to rush. He loves to get there early, watch them do batting practice, catch some home runs in right field. And we had a great day. And I'm so grateful to therapists like you, programs like the one that I had, and the techniques and the skills that have helped me get my life back. So I want to wrap this up by talking to you, my audience, and letting you know that if you feel any of these things, you're not alone, and that there's nothing wrong with you, and that there is healing, there is an option, there is hope. Because there have been times in my life where I felt hopeless. I just think there's something wrong with me, and I'm just flawed, and I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I want to tell you that there is a light, and Jill and I are available. If you work for an organization, if you manage people, if you're a teacher, if you're a superintendent, if you're in a position, or if you just work somewhere, like I'm saying, and you think that what you heard could be of value, then I would love to hear from you. I would love a conversation, because I think the conversations that Jill and I have, and maybe you have these conversations with your friends, are what life is about. Besides loving and connecting to other human beings, it's about being completely open with someone that's safe. That's how I feel with you, Jill. I know I can tell you anything, and it won't be like, holy shit, Peter, you are messed up. You'll be like, yeah, and relate to it in some way. So I want to invite you, even if you're not a manager, if you just work somewhere and you care about the people that you work with, we would love to come in and do a presentation and start to help us all of us together on the other side of this past 2 years of this very challenging and difficult time, there is a way for us to come out of this. That's why I call it waking from the fire. When I say fire, it's trauma. It could be childhood trauma. It could be trauma that we're experiencing right now over the past 2 years, that together we can help each other, support each other, share strategies, what worked for you, what worked for me, bring other professionals into the mix so that we are not alone and we have a team literally behind us. So if there's an opportunity, send me an email. Let's have a conversation and we'll figure it out. Jill, I want to thank you so much for this time. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And next time I'm going to have a pad because man, you said something and then I wanted to listen to the next thing you said, but I wanted to remember that thing you said before that. So we'll do that.
It's a good thing you recorded it.
It's a good thing I recorded it. I can go back and look at it. But thanks for joining me, Jill. And I'm looking forward to many more like this.
Yes, absolutely. Shared pain is such a lesser burden, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, until next time, I'm Peter.